I once asked the minister, Rick Warren, who's head of the enormously successful Saddleback Church, which is one of the faith-based organizations involved in Rwanda, what it was about your leadership, President Kagame, that was different. And Rick Warren said, well, Paul Kagame understands that it's more important to teach a man how to fish. And then he says, but beyond that, he says, President Kagame understands that it's important to teach people fish catching technology, fish salesmanship, fish distribution channels, the whole kind of enterprise foundations that make enterprise not only sustainable, but take it out of cottage industry territory. President Kagame, in your speech, you've been encouraging YPOers to invest in your country. I'll ask you the same question as I asked John. What's your attitude toward charity and social enterprise in Rwanda?
Definitely, social enterprise has singularly come out to be very helpful, and it is a bridge between what people are trying to do, and sometimes people focused mainly on profits may be shy to come in. But social enterprise, if you will, opens the gates and becomes a link between that and the real investments that will bring the change that is required and then be able to settle. Charity may have work in certain situations. There are certain desperate situations, humanitarian situations that need immediate attention, and there is a sense of urgency to deal with certain matters. So in that case, it works, but then it doesn't work beyond that. It is not to encourage that to continue beyond a certain point. You just deal with the emergence phase, and then social enterprises take over, and at the same time, the other investors, entrepreneurs come in and continue the journey. This is the way it is followed through.
John, can you give us a nice list of recommendations? I'm asking you to produce a list on the spot, but for YPOers in the audience who want to get engaged in projects in Africa, and number one, and are there concrete projects or specific projects as opposed to concrete, projects in Liberia that you would like YPOers to get engaged in? So the general African and then the specific Liberia.
Well, I think there's sort of two famous correlations in the world, in the development world, and one everybody knows, which is women's education and GDP per capita. And that's one that a lot of the aid agencies are working on. They're improving women's education and hence seeing movements in the gross domestic product of the country. The second one, which we're all forgetting, is there's also a great correlation between kilowatt hours per person and GDP per capita. So I think that's an area that YPOs can get involved in to really electrify Africa. And I do it in the following way. I do it with green electricity. I think we've made the mistakes in the Western world. We've got 40-year investments in coal plants, which are just going to bury us in some ways. So I think projects that I think that YPOs get involved in are ones that are providing electrification, either major plants for cities that are green power plants using biomass. President Kagame's got plans for geothermal, as does Kenya. Ideas like this, or small rural projects to electrify. Because by doing electrification in a green way, we're not hurting the planet. We should be able to access monies from the Western world that they're supposed to be giving to the developing world to help them with climate change. And so why don't we do something that helps them with the economy at the same time, which is to get electrification. So I would encourage YPOers to get involved in projects that will provide green electricity to Africa, be they small, be they advisory on big projects like the Inga hydro project, but try to encourage that, because we'll get both development and a green economy in that way. So ideas like that I think would be important for.
I'll throw out a third correlation to your two excellent ones and ask you if it has relevance in Africa. Carl Schramm, who heads the Kaufman Foundation, which is the leading think tank in the United States on entrepreneurship, said the most important thing for GDP growth in America was the number of startups that scaled over a 2 or 3 decade period, and specifically the number of raw startups that got to $1 billion in revenue over a 2 or 3 decade period. So they didn't have to be overnight successes. They could be iterative successes, but it wasn't just the number of startups, and it wasn't just the raw number of entrepreneurs. It was really the ones that scale, and those are the ones that move the needle on growth. Is that a fair correlation to apply to Africa, even if the numbers are different?
Sure, I think it is. I mean, there's 2 ways to look at it. One is to say that, remember we're talking about capitalism here. And the problem with capitalism, when you look at it only as small entrepreneurs with one person, they're not using any capital. They're not building a capital to build a base, to build a larger enterprise, which will hire lots of people. So I do think that scaling enterprise is such, and I think that in social enterprise we failed. And we've probably got the largest social enterprise company in the world, and it's a very small, in relative terms, company. So I think that the Western world has done very good encouraging social enterprise into small microfinance, et cetera, but that's, creating a lot of basket weavers in some ways, not to be critical, but it's very good. But at a certain point, we need some serious capital. There are capital-intensive industries. There's training programs needed. There's employment. There's scale. And we can only address these issues if we can get companies from the startup, being creative, but as social enterprise potentially to actually have some scale. And I think that is a good correlation. Now, whether it's a cat and the mouse, whether you get the big company because you did good work in education, health, or corruption, I don't know, but it would be a good correlation, I think so, yeah. And probably not $1 billion, but 100 million. And the question in Africa in general is, where are the world-leading companies from Africa? And I think Africa needs some, and maybe there's almost a branding issue there. Let's get African products branded so they can develop that brand recognition.
Well, I've seen all around the world the power that one entrepreneur who makes it big, who inspires the local community, whether it was Seattle having such high unemployment in the 1970s that they literally had billboards that said, well, the last person to leave Seattle, please turn out the lights. Now, when you think of the community, you think of a highly entrepreneurial community. Why? Probably Bill Gates, and that begat Amazon and Starbucks and all kinds of places that really feel that Seattle is a place to be an entrepreneur. So the question that I ask for both of you is, do you see those heroes of enterprise arising who can inspire all the people around them, as opposed to create envy, but by their own energy and ethical behavior and moral foundation? Are those people coming up through the system, President Kagame?
Yes, absolutely. In Africa, in different parts of Africa, almost in every country, you are seeing the emergence of this. First, I think it was right, as was said earlier, the small enterprises, as they multiply, they form a large base, and then the emergence of the big enterprises are seen rather as the way that should be emulated rather than conflictual with the base that has been created. And we are seeing in Africa that emerge, and we value the need for creation of more small and medium enterprises more as a base that gives the starting point for a number of other people, including the big companies and enterprises, to emerge and be emulated. And it is happening across Africa. You see it. You go to Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, it's Ivory, or Burkina Faso, it's Malawi, Zambia, it's South Africa, Botswana. You see all these coming up, and there is only a need to encourage that to keep happening.
Well, let me ask the final question to you, President Kagame. In your speech, you mentioned that you need the support of YPOers to implement your ambitious plans for your country. Can you give us some examples of specific ways that YPOers should engage your country in your development plans?
In actual fact, this is already happening, happily, where members of YPO have been visiting our country in different teams And different individuals have taken interest in working with local business leaders and helping them be more productive and also raise the quality of their products so that these fit very well with the markets that are there for such a products, whether it is in agriculture or handicrafts and different other areas. So the more of this we get, the better, and the more we realize the acceleration of this growth and subsequent development associated with it.
I think also the subcontracting that we as Western companies for Buchanan Renewables, we would love to start working to subcontracting our trucking, which will start a trucking industry in Liberia, which will have many clients, and that's another way we can start developing some of those more medium-sized enterprises.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen. This is just absolutely terrific.